I think I saw my reflection's eyes tick. The abandoned mine air hangs thick as forgotten breath, smelling of wet stone and something older, like bone dust ground into the earth. My fingers, slick with nervous sweat, trace the child's shoe found inexplicably in my pocket. It's cold silk, unnaturally damp against my palm, the damp seam pressing into my neck like a slow, insistent tide. Flickering streetlights, their glow fog muffled and weak as a dying ember, cast long, grasping shadows that writhe across the mine's damp, lichen-streaked walls. The antique gold-laced trim of the shoe, blackened with damp, feels like sun-bleached bone against my skin. A violin's scrape cuts through the oppressive quiet. Not the sound of a bow on strings, but something far worse. A key dragged over rotten bone, a metallic rasp that echoes the mine's ancient hollow bones. It scrapes over the pipes, a sound that vibrates up my spine, making my teeth ache. The scrape stops abruptly, leaving only the frantic drumming of my own heart, a frantic counterpoint to the silence. My trembling hands, slick with the shoe's unnatural dampness, trace the delicate lace pattern. Tiny, almost invisible insects seem to crawl beneath my own skin at the wrist, a faint, tickling sensation that makes my stomach clench with annoyance. Fudju, doof. I tell myself, fuddy, tell myself, old mine dusty. But the scent of wet lace blooms in the damp air, thick and cloying, like forgotten laundry left in a tomb. The shoe's dampness spreads up my arm, a slow, cold tide seeping through my silk sleeve, the damp lace smell intensifying, mingling with the mine's wet stone odor. My neck tingles, the cold silk pressing harder against my skin. I blink, trying to clear the fog of confusion, the annoyance at this persistent, illogical moisture. The violin's scrape was real. It stopped. The dampness doesn't. It spreads, a slow, cold river moving up my arm, the scent of wet lace now overwhelming, clinging to my skin, filling my nose. I feel the tiny insects under my skin, a constant, low-level thrumming, a sensation that should be impossible but is utterly, irrevocably real. The mine's shadows deepen, the flickering streetlights seeming to dim further, casting the walls into near-total blackness. The only sound is the rhythmic, wet drip, drip, from a leak high above, each drop hitting a pool below with a sound like a single, slow heartbeat. The wet lace scent intensifies, sharp and clean, yet utterly alien in this damp, decaying place. It's the smell of the child's shoe, of the child's breath, of something long dead. I squeeze my eyes shut, trying to force the dampness, the scent, the violin's scrape, the crawling insects away. Just a trick of the mine air, I think. The annoyance flaring hot beneath the creeping cold. Just the damp. But the dampness is real, the scent is real, the insects under my skin are real. I open my eyes. The dampness has spread further, a cold band around my upper arm. The scent of wet lace is still there, sharp and undeniable, clinging to my skin. Then, as I blink once more, the scent vanishes, not fades. Vanishes like smoke blown away by a sudden, unseen gust. The air is suddenly just the mine's usual damp stone smell, the wet stone scent, the faint odor of old water. Only the scent of wet lace remains, vanishing as I blink. I tugged at the lace of the glove, a delicate, almost skeletal structure of antique gold thread woven into black silk. It yielded with a sigh, the fabric cool and strangely resilient despite its age. I'd found it tucked within the lining of the child's shoe, another illogical detail in this impossible place. The lace separated, revealing something hidden within the palm suffered a tiny, intricately crafted gear, no larger than my thumbnail. It was brass, tarnished a dull ochre, the teeth impossibly fine, a miniature clockwork heart nestled within a dead child's finery. The mine's air tasted of dust and something metallic, a faint coppery tang that coated my tongue. I pressed the gear against the damp stone wall, the cold seeping through my gloves, a prickling sensation. The stone felt slick, coated in a film of something viscous like oil. The gear didn't once stick. Exactly, but it didn't fall either. It seemed to adhere. A faint vibration ran through the stone, a tremor too subtle to feel, but present nonetheless. The cat, perched on a pile of collapsed timbers, observed me with its mismatched eyes. One was a milky, clouded blue, the other a startling, polished amber. They clicked, a dry, rhythmic sound like beads striking stone, each click echoing the drip, drip from the cavern roof. The sound was relentless, a slow, maddening pulse. It wasn't a natural echo either. It wasn't bouncing off the walls. It was subid within the stone, resonating from the core of the mine itself. My thumb protested as I pressed the gear further, a sharp sting blossoming as the edge bit into my skin. Not a deep cut, but enough to draw blood. A bead of crimson welled up, mixing with the cold, damp silk of the shoe still clutched in my other hand. The scent of blood, sharp and iron-rich, momentarily overpowered the mind's musty odor. I barely registered the pain. It was a distant sensation, muted, as if my nerves were numbed. The cat's amber eye caught the weak light of the street lamp filtering through the mine entrance. It didn't twid glow, but it seemed to absorb the light, intensifying it, returning a distorted, fractured reflection. The reflection mirrored the broken note of a violin, a discordant, wavering sound that seemed to emanate not from an instrument, but from the very structure of the mine. The sound was like a stretched wire vibrating on the edge of breaking. I traced the cut on my thumb with my gaze. The blood, instead of flowing, seemed to darken. Not coagulate, but absorb light. The crimson deepened, becoming a bruised, almost black hue. The insects under my skin, the ones I dismissed as dust, stirred with renewed vigor, a frantic, crawling sensation that made my teeth ache. They weren't just at my wrist anymore. The crawling sensation had spread up my arm, reaching my elbow, a network of tiny, insistent prickles. The cat shifted, its body a sleek, dark shadow against the decaying wood. It didn't move towards me. It didn't move at all. It simply watched. The amber eye remained fixed on my hand, on the darkening blood, on the tiny gear pressed into the damp stone. A low, guttural purr rumbled in its chest, a vibration that resonated in my bones. It wasn't a comforting sound. It was a promise. The stone around the gear began to change. It wasn't a visible transformation, not at first, but the texture altered, becoming smoother, almost polished. The dampness seemed to recede, replaced by a dry, brittle feel. The scent of the mine shifted, becoming less earthy, less organic, and more mechanical. The smell of oil and metal, of gears grinding, of something ancient and terribly constructed. The gear pulsed with a faint internal light, a soft ochre glow that spread through the stone, tracing the intricate network of cracks and fissures. The glow intensified, illuminating the mine walls with a sickly yellow luminescence. The shadows writhed, twisting into shapes that weren't quite right, geometries that defied logic. I blinked, trying to focus, but the shapes persisted, coalescing into something vaguely humanoid, something skeletal and impossibly tall. The insects under my skin were no longer just crawling. They were burrowing, a searing, burning sensation that made me gasp. The skin on my arm tightening, stretching, as if something were trying to escape. The blackness of the blood on my thumb deepened, spreading up my arm, a creeping tide of darkness. I tried to pull my hand away from the stone, but it wouldn't move. It was as if my skin had fused with the rock, as if I were becoming part of the mine itself. The cat's purr grew louder, a resonant vibration that filled the cavern, drowning out the drip. Drip. The air tasted of metal and something else, something sweet and sickeningly familiar. The scent of wet lace, returning with a vengeance, stronger than before. The violin's note wasn't just in my head anymore, it was a physical thing, a jagged wire pressed against my ribs. I followed it deeper into the mine, the shoe in my grip slick with a dampness that hadn't been there before. The sole clung to my palm, the leather stretched thin over something pulsing beneath, something punrong. The air here was different now, thick with the scent of old iron and the faint, sickly sweetness of rotting lace. My fingers traced the stitching along the shoe's edge, each thread a tiny black needle, each knot a wound. The cat was already waiting. It sat on a rusted support beam, its mismatched eyes fixed on me, the blue one clouded like fogged glass, the amber one sharp, knowing. It didn't move, didn't blink, just watched the drip. Drip, drip of water from the ceiling had slowed, as if the mine itself were holding its breath. Then, plink, something small hit the stone beside my boot. I didn't look down. I knew. The gear, another one. The brass was cold, but not like metal should be. It was Sudi Aliv, humming faintly, a sound like a violin string drawn across a broken rib, a wet, rasping shush that vibrated in my teeth. I picked it up. The moment my fingers closed around it, the hum sharpened, a high, keening note that sliced through the mine's silence. The cat's tail twitched once, twice like a metronome counting down. The gear was smaller than the last, delicate, its teeth too fine to be real. I pressed it to my palm. The brass bit into my skin, not cutting, but twinding, but a slow, deliberate abrasion. A thin line of red appeared, not blood, not exactly. Something darker, thicker, like oil seeping from a cracked engine. It spread in streaks, following the grooves of my fingerprints. The cat's eyes pulsed in time with the hum. I dropped the gear into the shoe, plink-wanty. The sound echoed, but not in the mine. It echoed funding, Inside me, a reverberation in my bones, my teeth. The dampness in the shoe spread across my hand, cold and clinging, the leather now slick as a glove filled with something viscous. The lace at the throat of the shoe black, gold-threaded twisted, the stitches unraveling in slow motion, the fibers stretching like taffy, like something being swun-pulled from the inside out. The scent of it was overwhelming now, a mix of mildew and something metallic, something that made my mouth water with the taste of pennies left too long in a pocket. The cat's purr started low, a dry grinding sound, like gears turning in reverse. It wasn't comforting. It was sooty insistent. The hum of the gear intensified, vibrating up my arm, shaking my bones. The dampness spread up my wrist, creeping like ink in water, the lace now clinging to my skin, the gold threads pressing into my flesh like barbed wire. I tried to pull away, but my hand was stuck. The shoe fused to my palm, the leather fused to the lace fused to tumbine. The cat's eyes locked onto mine. The hum rose to a scream. The dampness reached my elbow. I traced the dampness with a fingertip, a black smear blossoming on the stone wall. It wasn't water, not entirely. It had the viscosity of oil, the chill of a tomb. The shoe, still clutched in my other hand, felt less like an object and more like an extension of my own flesh, a cold, pulsing weight. The violin's note had ceased abruptly, as if the player had simply stopped breathing. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was filled with the mine itself. The groaning of timbers, the almost imperceptible shift of earth, and something else, one to 4 day, a pressure against my skull, a feeling of being watched from the rock itself. I began to map the passage with the shoe, not deliberately, but instinctively. Each press of its sole against the stone left a darker stain, a trail of slickness that seemed to follow me, even as I moved. The cat hadn't shifted, its mismatched eyes reflecting the meager light like polished pebbles. The blue one, clouded with what looked like cataracts, seemed to absorb the light, while the amber one remained unnervingly focused, unblinking. It was a trick of the light. I told myself, the dampness playing on the glass. A convenient lie. The wall felt wrong. Not structurally unsound, but textured. Not with the rough grain of stone, but with something finer, something almost organic. I pressed my palm flat against it, and the dampness yielded, flowed into the lines of my skin, a cold intrusion. It wasn't merely wet, it was find-hungry. A prickling sensation started at my fingertips, spreading up my arm, 1,000 tiny needles testing the surface of my skin. I imagined insects pale and translucent, crawling beneath, mapping the veins. The cat's head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement. Then, a single thorny click, not a meow, not a purr, but the distinct sound of glass against glass, like two stones being struck together. Its amber eyes seemed to dim, then flare, then fade to a dull, milky opacity. A faint echo, a distorted imitation of the violin's broken note, seemed to emanate from the wall itself, a ghostly resonance. It wasn't coming through the wall. It was coming from it. The stone was vibrating, humming with a frequency that set my teeth on edge. I pulled my hand away, leaving a smeared print on the stone, a black blossom against the gray. The sensation didn't recede. It intensified, spreading up my arm into my shoulder, a coldness that felt like bone. The shoe pulsed in my grip, a slow, rhythmic throb. I could feel the gears inside it, or what I perceived as gears grinding against each other, a mechanical heartbeat. The cat's body lowered almost to the ground, a sinuous curve of black against the rusted metal. Its head was still tilted, focused on the wall, and the imitation of the violin note returned. Fainter now, more fragmented, like a memory struggling to surface, a whisper, barely audible, riding on the vibration of the stone. I pressed my ear to the wall, ignoring the creeping cold, the prickling sensation. The dampness seeped through my coat, chilling me to the core. The sound wasn't outside the wall, it wasn't even twinty the wall. It was swindy behind my ear, inside my skull. A broken melody, a mournful tune played on a single frayed string. It felt familiar, a song from a childhood I didn't remember having. The cat's eyes went dark, the amber one extinguished, the blue one a milky void. A final footing click, softer this time, barely perceptible. The wall before me seemed to ripple, the stone itself distorting, the dampness coalescing into a black viscous film. It wasn't a visual trick, it was a shifting, a breathing. The pressure against my skull intensified, and I understood with a sickening certainty that I wasn't mapping the mine. The mine was mapping twin me. The dampness reached my wrist, a tightening band of cold, and the shoe, slick and heavy, pulled at my hand, urging me forward deeper into the darkness. A slow, insistent drag. I didn't resist. I didn't want to. The wall was whispering my name. The harpoon lay half buried in the damp, its barbed iron tip glinting like a fresh wound against the pale gray of the mine's underbelly. I knelt, the knee of my coat brushing against stone slick with something older than decay, something preserved. The shaft was wrapped in layers of what looked like fossilized silk, the thread still clinging with a stubborn, unnatural tenacity. My fingers hovered, then pressed. The material gave way under my touch, not tearing but tough unraveling, as if it had been waiting for this moment for centuries. A cold, viscous slickness seeped into my palm. Not water, not oil. Something that moved like a living thing, clinging to my skin, tracing the lines of my veins in slow, deliberate strokes. The shoe in my other hand pulsed in response, its weight shifting, the gears inside it grinding into a slower, deeper rhythm, like a heart adjusting to a new cadence. The silk, if it was silk, felt like the inside of a mollusk, smooth and cool. But beneath it, something tightened. My arm, from wrist to elbow, began to hum. A vibration that started at the bone and worked its way outward. The sensation of a bowstring drawn too tight, the string itself alive with the promise of sound. I pressed the harpoon's shaft against my forearm. The silk clung there too, spreading like ink in water, and the vibration intensified, traveling up my arm in waves. It wasn't just sound, it was sunta pressure, a deep, resonant throb that settled into my collarbone, my ribs, the hollow behind my sternum. The mine seemed to lean in closer, the walls breathing around me, the dampness thick with the scent of old salt and something metallic, like the inside of a rusted can. The cat hadn't moved, but its glass eyes were fixed on me, the blue one absorbing the dim light, the amber one reflecting it back in fractured shards. The vibration wasn't just in my arm. It was in my third low, droning note, like the harpoon's barbs scraping against bone. But inside me, my jaw ached with it. The pressure building behind my eyes, the sensation of something thiddy stirring beneath my skin. I could feel the silk spreading, not just on my arm, but under my sleeve, creeping up my neck. The fibers twisting around my tendons, my muscles. The harpoon's weight increased, as if the mine itself were pulling it toward me, as if the silk were guiding it, shaping it into something else entirely. I shouldn't have done it. I knew that. But the cold, the silence, the way the mine seemed to breathe, it had all been waiting for this. The shoe's pulse matched the harpoon's now, a slow, insistent drag, like the tide pulling at a drowned man's boots. The cat's tail flicked once, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone, and then it was still again watching. The silk reached my shoulder. The vibration became a fui note, a single broken string plucked deep inside my chest. I could taste it, copper, iron, the tang of old blood. The harpoon's tip pressed harder against my skin, and for a moment I saw it, the whaling ship, the deck slick with gore, the harpoon sinking into flesh that wasn't mine. The mine groaned, a sound like timber splitting, and the silk twin-pulled not just on my arm, but twin through me, unspooling something older than memory, something that had been waiting in the dark. The cat's eyes dimmed, then flared, the amber one burning bright for a single, impossible second before going dark again. The harpoon's vibration became a faux song, a mournful, fractured melody that filled the mine, that filled Tavaitimi the notes, echoing in my bones, in the hollows of my throat. The silk spread up my neck, and I didn't fight it. I couldn't. The mine had me now, the harpoon had me. The shoe, the cat, the dampness, it was all one thing, and it was pulling me deeper, deeper into the wet, waiting dark. The last thing I felt was the silk reaching my throat, the vibration becoming a scream that wasn't mine, and then the harpoon's barbs found their mark, and the mine swallowed me whole. The lace is a thing of wet parchment, stiff with the slow rot of salt water. It unravels from the needle's eye like a vein splitting under pressure, each thread a fine white filament that glistens with the sheen of drowned silk. I press the shoe's tongue against my glove, the damp lace clinging to my skin like a second shadow, and the moment the needle pierces the leather, the violin's note finsidine. My skull doesn't just sound it for the unfold sign. A single, broken string, plucked so deep it vibrates in my molars, in the hollow behind my ears, in the marrow of my bones. The cat's glass eyes pulse in time with it, the blue one dimming like a candle snuffed under glass, the amber one flickering bright as a struck flint, then dimming again, a rhythm so precise it feels like a heartbeat borrowed from something else. The lace stitches themselves are wrong. They don't pull through the glove's fabric so much as Tumvi consume. It each thread a tiny mouth, each knot a tiny hinge. Unhinging the glove seems like a mouth unhinging to swallow. The shoe's weight shifts in my pocket, not just pulled but 20 summoned. the leather creaking as if it's waking from a long sleep. My fingers twitch, the glove's cuffs tighten, the lace stitches wrapping around my wrist like a bracelet of living wire. The violin's note drags, a bow scraping across a string that's never quite in tune, and the cat's tail flicks, not a warning but a fundy beating gun, the sound of wet parchment snapping under a boot, each snap a counterpoint to the violin's wail. I shouldn't be doing this. I know that. The lace is wrong. The shoe is wrong. The way the cat's eyes track the stitches, the way the glove's fabric surreples, like water disturbed by a stone, the way the violin's note doesn't fade but to visprezzi, creeping up my arm like the silk from the harpoon, like something that's been waiting for a host. My breath hitches. The lace stitches sipool, not just the shoe from my pocket, but the glove's seams unraveling, the fabric parting like flesh splitting under pressure. The shoe emerges, the sole slick with something darker than water, the leather stitched with the same wrong lace, the threads humming with the violin's note, the cat's eyes pulsing in time with the hum. The shoe's weight is a dead weight, the kind that settles in your gut when you've drowned and don't realize it yet. The lace stitches wrap around my wrist, not binding but tidied anchoring. The glove's fabric now a lattice of white filaments, each thread a tendril, each tendril a vein, feeding something that's not the shoe, not the glove, but the sampesa between them. The space where the violin's note lives, the space where the cat's eyes flicker like broken lights in a storm. The lace pulls tighter, the shoe's sole presses against my palm, the leather warm, the stitching further breathing. The cat's tail flicks again, the sound of a wet tongue dragging across dry bone, and the violin's note doesn't just vibrate in my skull anymore, it went and foldsy, a map of threads unspooling across my skin. The glove's cuffs now a second mouth, the lace stitches a second tongue, and the shoe's weight isn't just on my palm anymore. It's in my chest, it's in my teeth. It's in the hollow behind my eyes where the cat's eyes flicker like broken lights in a storm, where the lace stitches pull, and the shoe waits, and the glove's fabric parts like flesh splitting under pressure, and the violin's note drags and the cat's tail flicks, and the lace stitches pull the shoe from my pocket, and the glove's seams unravel, and the lace stitches wrap around my wrist, and the shoe's sole presses against my palm, and the violin's note unfolds, and the cat's eyes flicker, and the lace stitches pull, and the shoe emerges, and the glove's fabric ripples like water disturbed by a stone, and the violin's note spreads, and the cat's tail flicks, and the lace stitches pull the shoe from my pocket, and the glove's seams unravel, and the lace stitches wrap around my wrist, and the shoe's sole presses against my palm, and the violin's note unfolds, and the cat's eyes flicker, and the lace stitches pull, and the shoe waits, and the glove's fabric parts like flesh splitting under pressure. The wall of the mine is not stone, not exactly. It's something older, something that breathes. My fingers press into the dampness, and the texture yields like sun-warmed wax, but beneath that, something pin moves. Not the slow creep of mold, not the sluggish crawl of beetles in the dark, but a fufurdum pulse, a shallow, wet thrum, like a heartbeat taken through layers of sediment. The air isn't thick. It's a liquidy, clinging to my skin in thin sheets, and when I exhale, it condenses into a ghost of my breath, swirling like fog caught in a lantern's glow. The light here isn't light at all. It's the afterimage of light, a bruise of yellow and black that seeps from the flickering lanterns, pooling at the base of the pillars like spilled honey. The cat is watching, or at least I think it is. Its glass eyes don't track me so much as absorb me, the blue one drinking in the yellow, the amber one drinking in the black. And for a moment I swear the mind itself tilts, the walls leaning in as if to listen. The shoe's wetness isn't on my glove anymore. It's siven side-eyed. I can feel it. A slow creep along my veins, a weight settling in the hollows of my throat. My tongue is thick, too thick, and when I press it against the roof of my mouth, the taste is there. Copper, but older, like the inside of a rusted nail that's been buried for decades. The cat's tail flicks once, twice, the sound a dry whisper against the mine's ribs. Then it's still, waiting. I don't remember deciding to touch the wall, but there I am, fingers sinking into the damp, and the pulse answers. Not with a sound, never a sound, but with a footy pressure, a deep, resonant hum that vibrates in my teeth, in the fillings, in the spaces between my molars where the nerves still ache from the last extraction. The cat's eyes flicker, the blue one dims, the amber one brightens, and then a gear drops into my palm. It's small, no larger than a thimble, but it's soon wrong. The metal isn't metal. It's lace coiled and twisted, the threads humming with the same broken violin note that's been inside my skull since the glove first split. The cat's tail flicks again, this time with a sound like dry leaves skittering across a tin roof, and the gear's shriek hoof in my hand, the vibration climbing up my wrist like a spider's leg testing the seams of my skin. I shouldn't take it, I know that. But the pulse in the wall is a promise, a slow, insistent pull, and the shoe in my pocket is heavy, too heavy, like a drowning man's boots. I press the gear to my lips. The moment it touches my tongue, it unfolds. Not like lace, never like lace, but like a mouth opening, like the stitches in the glove splitting wider, until the gear isn't metal anymore. It's swine flesh, wet and glistening. The threads dissolving into something that tastes like salt water and old leather. The hum becomes a wail, a single broken string stretched too tight, and the cat's tail lashes out, the sound of a wet whip cracking against the mine's ribs. The wall pulses harder. The dampness sighs singing now, a high, keening note that vibrates in my sternum, in the cartilage behind my ears, in the marrow of my bones. The gear melts, not on my tongue, not in my mouth. It melts into me. The wetness wasn't just on the glove, it overcame the glove. The leather seemed to soften, to lose its rigidity, the grain blurring as if submerged in water. I watched, a detached observer, as the dampness seeped from the fingertips, not outwards, but tinder-beanedwards, as if the glove itself were a sponge drawing moisture from the mine's breath. The lace, the intricate, almost skeletal pattern woven into the leather, seemed to pulse with the same shallow rhythm as the wall. It wasn't a visual trick. I could feel it, a prickling sensation against my skin, like the ghost of 1,000 needles. I traced the wall again. The pulse answered, a low thrum that resonated not in my ears, but in the marrow of my bones. The dampness is sung, a high, keening note that wasn't a sound. Not really. It was a vibration, a pressure against my skull, a feeling of being submerged in something viscous and ancient. The cat shifted, a silent ripple in the gloom. Its amber eye, the one that drank the black, narrowed. A fine tremor ran through its frame, a sympathetic echo of the wall's pulse. The gear. It was already in my hand. I don't remember reaching for it, don't remember the cold, metallic weight settling against my palm. It was simply 40 the line. A perfect circle of something that shouldn't be metal, something too intricate to be natural. The hum it emitted was a broken violin string, a single discordant note that amplified the tremor in the wall, in my bones. Annoyance. That's what I felt. A profound, almost physical annoyance at the intrusion, the violation of what I thought was my own volition. I pressed the gear to my lips. It wasn't a conscious decision, not a reasoned act. It was a compulsion, a surrender to the relentless pull of the wall, the insistent whisper of the dampness. The moment the cold, unfamiliar surface touched my tongue, it didn't simply unfold. It wasn't a transformation, but a merging, a dissolving. The lace threads, the delicate filigree, didn't unravel. They became something else. They became the dampness that now saturated my glove, the dampness that was now twin me. The sensation was unexpected. A cold silk, a liquid grace, spreading across my tongue, down my throat into my chest. It wasn't painful, not exactly. It was unsettling. A violation of the boundaries of myself. The lace didn't just flow, it twine-rooted. Tiny, invisible tendrils burrowed into the soft tissues of my mouth, anchoring themselves, claiming territory. A metallic tang, sharper than copper, bloomed on my palate, a taste of something old, something buried. The cat's tail lashed, a dry, rustling whisper against the mine's ribs. It wasn't a crack, but a scraping like bone against stone. The wall pulsed harder, the dampness intensifying, the singing note rising in pitch. It resonated not just in my bones, but in the very structure of my being. It felt as though the mine itself was exhaling, and I was absorbing its breath. The gear didn't melt, it twintegrated its shoe. It became part of the flow, part of the dampness, part of the dampness. The lace was no longer a pattern on a surface. It was a network, a filament, a living structure spreading through my veins. The annoyance intensified, a sharp, insistent throb behind my eyes. I wanted to recoil, to tear it out, to scream. But I couldn't. The pull was too strong. The wall's pulse was now my pulse. The mine's breath was now my breath. The dampness flowed into my glove's lace, not as a separate entity, but as a continuation, a completion. The lace seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with the wall's rhythm. The leather softened further, becoming pliable, almost translucent. I could see the veins beneath the surface, pulsing with the same unsettling light as the wall. The cat's tail stilled. Its amber eye, the one that drank the black, locked onto mine, and I saw for a fleeting moment something that wasn't feline, something ancient, something knowing, something expectant. The air itself seemed to vibrate, a low, humming resonance that filled the mine and settled within me, a promise of something I couldn't yet comprehend. The wetness wasn't simply on my skin. It beaded slick and cold across the backs of my hands, the nape of my neck, a phantom tide rising with each shallow breath. It felt applied. Not the dampness of the mine, the perpetual mist clinging to the rock, but something added, a coating. The child's shoe, still tucked into my coat pocket, felt heavier now, saturated, as if it were leaking its moisture directly into my flesh. A faint metallic scent clung to the air like old pennies and something else, something faintly floral, almost sickeningly sweet. I raised a hand, watching the light play across the glistening surface. My reflection in the dull sheen of the mine wall wasn't quite mirroring me. It was off. A subtle lag, a hesitation in the movements. Not a delay, not precisely, but a different quality of movement. More deliberate, more precise. The antique gold lace of the glove seemed to absorb the light, not reflect it, the filigree appearing less like woven thread and more like veins beneath the skin. A network. A clicking sound, small, precise, like glass beads striking each other. I glanced towards the cat. It was perched on a low outcropping of rock, its mismatched glass eyes fixed on my reflection. The amber one, the one that seemed to swallow the darkness, narrowed. The other, a milky white, remained vacant, unseeing. But the amber one, it wasn't observing me. It was observing the footy reflection. I shifted my weight, testing the mimicry. My reflection mirrored the movement, but with a slight distortion, a stretching of the limbs, a subtle exaggeration of the angle of my head. It was unsettling, like looking at a caricature, a twisted echo of my own form. The wetness intensified, spreading across my skin, slick and cold. It wasn't cold anymore, not exactly. It was neutral. Absent of temperature, my fingers brushed against the damp leather of the glove. The lace throbbed, a faint internal pulse that echoed the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Or was it the other way around? I couldn't be certain. The annoyance, that peculiar, persistent irritation, had intensified. It wasn't a physical pain, not yet. It was a dissonance, a sense of wrongness, a feeling that something was being imposed upon me, something alien. I wanted to peel the glove off, rip it away from my skin, but the thought felt distant, unimportant. The clicking sound again, louder this time, more insistent. The cat's amber eye remained locked on my reflection. And then, the impossible. My hand, the one encased in the lace, moved, not by my volition, not consciously. It rose, slowly, deliberately, and reached towards my coat pocket. For the shoe. I hadn't intended to touch it. I hadn't even thought about it. Yet there it was, my hand acting on its own accord, and then I saw it. Or thought I saw it, a flicker, a distortion in the space between me and my reflection. The reflection's hand mirroring my own, but not quite. It was reaching for my pocket too. The cat's amber eye clicked once, a brittle echoing sound in the vastness of the mine, and then it faded. Not dimmed, not closed. It simply lost its color, became a flat, opaque disk. The white eye remained vacant, a milky void. My hand found the shoe. The dampness seeped through the fabric of my coat, cold and insistent. I pulled it out, the wet leather slick against my palm. It was heavier now, almost impossibly so. And then I looked down at my other hand, the hand that hadn't moved, the hand that should have been empty. It was reaching for the shoe. In my other pocket, the reflection's hand reached for the shoe in my pocket. Now, on its other hand, the glove's lace thinned where it met my skin, a brittle weave dissolving like old lace in rain. I pulled. Not with force, but with the slow, inevitable yielding of something that had never truly been separate. The antique gold filigree cracked along its seams, not tearing, but crumbling into fine tarnished dust that settled on my palm. The wetness beneath it intensified, not dampness, but a deep internal saturation, like the shoe had dissolved into my marrow. I watched my fingers, now bare, as they moved toward my coat pocket. My hand was still mine, or it was. The thought felt distant, like a memory of a dream. The metallic scent clung to the air, sharp as a fresh cut, undercut with that same sickly floral sweetness from the child's shoe. It was inside me now, not on me. Inside. I drew the coat pocket open. The shoe was there, heavy and slick, its leather blackened with moisture. I lifted it. It felt like lifting a stone that had been soaked in the mine's deepest, coldest pool. The wetness seeped through my coat sleeve, cold and insistent. I looked down. My other hand, empty, bare, and utterly mine, was already reaching into the pocket. Not my volition, not my thought. It moved with the precise, unnerving calm of a clockwork mechanism. The reflection in the mine wall, the one that had mirrored my every twitch, now moved with it. Its hand, encased in the same lace that had been my glove, was reaching for the shoe in 40 pocket. The realization struck like a physical blow. The lace wasn't on my hand. It was swung apart toward of my hand. The lace had been woven into my skin, the filigree a network of veins beneath the surface. And the shoe wasn't just wet, it was sign growing from my skin. The leather wasn't a separate object, it was a part of me. The wetness wasn't leaking from the shoe, it was the shoe's moisture absorbing my skin, my blood, my very identity. I lifted my bare hand palm up towards the mine wall. The reflection mirrored the gesture, but its palm was turned slightly inward, the lace pattern on its skin forming a perfect, inverted outline of my own hand. The space between us seemed to thicken, to press in. The air tasted of copper and wet stone. I saw it then, not in the reflection, but in the space behind it, a faint, impossible distortion, like the air over a hot road but colder, and within that distortion, I saw the bone mask. Not a mask. A part of the reflection fused into its flesh, its edges sharp as broken glass. The mask's hollow eyes stared directly at me, not through the reflection but free through it. The mask's edge where it met the reflection's skin was a jagged line, and it was moving. Not the cat's glass beads. This was different. A dry, brittle internal click, like two small, perfect beads of glass striking each other. The cat on the rock was still, its amber eye now a flat, opaque disc. The white eye remained vacant. The sound came from the reflection, from the bone mask fused into my own skin. The click was my heartbeat. The violin's broken note wasn't a sound. It was the sound of my own heart, the rhythm of the lace, the pulse of the shoe inside me. It was the sound of the mask stitching itself into my flesh. The click came again, sharper this time, a sound felt in the bones of my skull, not heard by my ears. The reflection's hand, encased in lace and bone, closed over the shoe in my pocket. And then it clicked once more. A final, dry sound like the last bead settling in a glass jar.